The air in the Yellowstone Basin in October 1878 carried a different kind of cold. It was a tension, a metallic scent of fear and frost that settled over the half-dozen prospecting camps scattered down the Lamar River Valley. In Elias Thorne's camp, 3 men huddled around a sputtering fire, their rifles, heavy .50-caliber sharps, never leaving their grip. For 2 nights, they hadn't slept. Their food cache, hung 20 feet high, had been torn down by a massive grizzly, and 2 of their mules were gone. They were exposed, exhausted, and losing the battle. A mile downriver, Silas Vane slept. His camp was silent. His single mule was calm. He was not a trapper, nor was he armed to the teeth. His camp was protected by a strange low barrier of rocks that snaked around his tent. The grizzlies that terrorized Thorne's camp, the same apex predators dominating the valley, had sniffed Vane's perimeter, probed it, and moved on. His defense was not a rifle. It was an equation of stone, angles, and animal psychology. What did this quiet, methodical man understand about force and deterrence that the seasoned frontiersman had completely missed? The year 1878 placed these men in a dangerous vacuum. The Yellowstone region was a wilderness of rumor, poised between the last days of the free-roaming tribes and the first hesitant claims of prospectors. It was not yet a managed park. It was a battleground of predators. The primary threat was Ursus arctos horribilis, the grizzly animals that could weigh over 900 pounds and viewed any new arrival as a challenge or a meal. The conventional wisdom for survival, carried west by trappers and traders, was a simple, 3-part doctrine. First, maintain a clean camp, though this was rarely followed. Second, keep a bear bag, hanging all food and scented items in a burlap sack, suspended at least 15 feet high and 10 feet from the trunk of a tree. Third, and most crucial, trust your firearm. A heavy rifle was considered the only true defense. Manuals of the time, such as they were, focused entirely on marksmanship and the power of the new metallic cartridges. The entire frontier philosophy was built on confrontation. It was assumed that a conflict would happen, and the victor would be the one with the superior weapon. This was the code Elias Thorne and his partners lived by. They viewed the landscape as a resource to be taken, and the bears as obstacles to be shot. Silas Vane, however, saw the problem not as one of combat, but of engineering. Elias Thorne's camp was a case study in the failure of conventional wisdom. He and his 2 partners had spent nearly $400 on their outfit, including 6 mules and 300 pounds of provisions. They followed the book precisely. They selected 2 towering lodgepole pines, 25 feet apart, and suspended their entire stock of bacon, flour, and coffee on a heavy rope slung between them. The cache hung a good 20 feet off the ground. It was, by all standards, a perfect setup. On the 3rd night, the boar arrived. It was a creature of immense size, dark and scarred. It didn't bother with the camp itself. It went for the cache. It didn't climb. It attacked the trees. For an hour the men listened to the sound of claws ripping bark and the sickening thud of the bear's shoulder hitting the pine. The bear, understanding leverage, focused on the smaller 10-inch diameter tree. With a crack that sounded like artillery, the upper trunk splintered and the entire 300-pound cache crashed to the earth. The men fired 14 rounds in the dark, wounding the animal and sealing their fate. The bear retreated, but the damage was done. Their food was gone, their mules were terrified, and they had just created a wounded, furious predator that now associated their camp with food. Their method had not only failed, it had made the situation exponentially more dangerous. Silas Vane was not a prospector. He was, by trade, a stonemason, and by hard experience, a former combat engineer for the Union Army. He had survived the siege of Petersburg in 1864, not by firing a rifle, but by building gabions, breastworks, and angled redoubts. He had spent months digging in the Virginia clay, learning how to stop the kinetic energy of a 12-pound cannonball. He learned that a vertical wall shatters, but a sloped wall, a glacis, deflects and dissipates force. After the war, he worked on railroad survey crews pushing west, where he encountered a different kind of knowledge. He spent a winter observing a Lakota winter camp, or Wanagi Utapi. He saw how they used the natural contours of the land, how they built shelters that used the snow as insulation, and how they understood the behavior of the bison herds. He learned that a massive force, whether a stampede or a grizzly, operates on a simple calculation of energy. It will always follow the path of least resistance. When Thorne and the other prospectors saw Vane meticulously moving river stones, day after day, they mocked him. They called him Badger Vane, or the Sapper, assuming he was too cowardly or strange to hunt. They saw a man wasting 8 hours of daylight, valuable prospecting time, building a rock garden. Vane ignored them, his focus absolute. Vane chose his campsite based on his Petersburg experience. He rejected the dense timber, which offered too many avenues of approach, and the open riverbank, which offered no protection. He selected a slight rise, backed by a 30-foot sheer rock face. There would be no surprises from the rear. Then he began to build, not a wall, but a system. For 10 days, he worked, moving an estimated 20 tons of glacial till and river stone by hand, and with a single mule. The result looked bizarre to the other men. It was not a high, vertical wall. It was a low, wide, triangular barrier, only 4 feet high at its peak, but 8 feet thick at the base. It encircled his small A-frame tent in a 50-foot diameter crescent. The outer face was not vertical, but sloped at a precise 45-degree angle. It looked, as Thorne scoffed, like a pile of pebbles a man could step right over. But Vane knew the bear wouldn't step over it. It would have to climb it. And Vane had engineered that climb to be impossible. Inersar enite hadisatrabaitui chen trairi cha. The conflict in the valley was one of opposing philosophies. Thorne and the trappers represented the American frontier's core belief in brute force. Their solution was reactive. A bigger gun, a higher cache, a sharper spike. They sought to stop the bear, to kill it. This required constant vigilance, expended massive amounts of energy, in guard duty, fear, and lost sleep, and was prone to catastrophic failure. Silas Vane represented a different, older, and more calculating wisdom. His system was built on prevention and energy management. He knew the bear was powerful, so he refused to engage it on the basis of power. He would win by making engagement inconvenient. His sloping walls were designed to deny purchase. His low profile was designed to appear non-threatening. His entire camp was a carefully constructed physics problem, designed to make the bear choose to go around. He was waging a psychological battle, not a physical one. He was betting his life that the bear's instinct for energy conservation was stronger than its aggression. The first test of this theory was observed by Mr. Arbuckle, a geologist with the Hayden Survey, who had arrived to map the basin's formations. Arbuckle was a man of instruments, carrying a transit, a thermometer, and a journal, and he was fascinated by Vane's use of local geology as fortification. One afternoon, a sow with 2 cubs appeared. She first investigated Thorne's camp, sniffing the air where the cache had been. The men shouted, fired 3 warning shots, wasting 18 cents in cartridges and terrifying their own mules, until the sow retreated. Arbuckle noted in his journal, Thorne camp, 3 rounds expended, 5 man-hours lost to guard duty. Later that day, the same sow arrived at Vane's camp. Arbuckle and Vane watched, silent. The bear approached the low stone barrier. She sniffed it. She placed a paw on the 45-degree slope. The loose, angular stones on the surface shifted and clattered under her weight. It was unstable. It was loud. It was annoying. She huffed, probed the wall for 100 yards, and finding no easy purchase, simply walked around the entire perimeter, leading her cubs downriver. Arbuckle's entry. Vane camp, 0 rounds, 0 hours lost. The Badger system, it appears, functions. Vane's barrier was a masterwork of military engineering, translated to the frontier. Arbuckle, in his technical appendix, detailed its construction. Layer 1 was the foundation. Vane had dug a 1-foot trench to lock the base stones, preventing the bear from digging under the wall. Layer 2 was the core. Massive boulders, 100 pounds or more, interlocked to create a stable mass. Layer 3, the shell, was the innovation. This was composed of medium-sized, 20-40 pound angular stones, left intentionally loose on the 45-degree slope. This was the trap. A charging animal would find its 900 pounds of force distributed onto a surface that would not hold, its paws sinking into the shifting rock. This unstable, rolling surface would bleed all its momentum instantly. The inner wall, by contrast, was a 90-degree vertical drop, creating a 4-foot parapet from which Vane could safely observe, or if necessary, fire. Finally, layer 4 was the choke point. He left a single 10-foot gap for an entrance, but this gap was protected by 2 overlapping curved stone walls, a design taken directly from medieval castles. Any animal entering would be forced into a narrow S-curve, completely blind and exposed to the interior. Shantai. The true test came in late November. A blue norther plunged the valley into an Arctic nightmare. The temperature dropped from 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 4.4 degrees C, to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, 23 degrees C, in 12 hours. The blizzard drove every predator into a desperate, frantic search for calories. The wounded boar grizzly, now starving and enraged, returned. It hit Thorne's camp first. The men were huddled in their tent, their fire useless in the wind. The bear, no longer caring about caches, simply charged the 10-ounce canvas. It was a massacre of material. The tent was ripped to shreds. Thorne's 50-caliber rifle was useless at point-blank range. The bear smashed through, broke Thorne's arm, and scattered the other 2 men into the blizzard. The camp was annihilated. The bear, still hungry, followed the river and found Vane's camp. Arbuckle, the geologist, had taken shelter there. They heard the roar. The bear charged the stone barrier. Just as Vane had planned, its momentum hit the 45-degree slope. Its paws tore at the loose stones which rolled away, denying purchase. It was like trying to run up a pile of marbles. The 900-pound animal slid, roaring in frustration, and tried again, only to fail. Enraged, it circled and found the one entrance. It plunged into the narrow, curved choke point. For 1 second it was perfectly framed, confused by the blind turn. Vane, protected by the inner parapet, fired 1 shot from his Springfield. The 50-70 round hit true. The bear collapsed, its bulk plugging the entrance. The system had worked. At dawn, the storm broke. The first survivors arrived at Vane's camp, Thorne's 2 partners, half frozen. One, a man named Miller, had severe frostbite on his feet. Vane and Arbuckle took them in. The small 50-foot enclosure was now a field hospital. Vane, the engineer, and Arbuckle, the man of science, retrieved Thorne, who was in shock, his arm shattered. The camp's operation now shifted. Arbuckle, taking on the role of quartermaster, took stock. Vane's supplies, which, unlike Thorne's, were stored inside the perimeter in a stone-lined pit, were intact. Arbuckle immediately implemented a strict rationing and sanitation protocol. He used Vane's small stove to melt snow for the wounded and to sterilize bandages. Vane's physical engineering had saved them from the predator, but it was Arbuckle's social engineering that kept 4 men alive for the next 3 days of the blizzard, huddled within the stone circle, while Thorne's camp was buried under 6 feet of snow. The incident was immortalized, not in frontier legend, but in Arbuckle's dry, methodical 1879 report on the geological formations of the upper Yellowstone Basin. In Appendix C, he included a statistical comparison. Thorne Camp, traditional method. 100% loss of provisions, 2 mules lost, value 160, 1 serious injury, compound fracture, 1 permanent disability, frostbite amputation, 14+ rounds expended in panic. Vane Camp, engineered barrier, 0% loss of provisions, 0 injuries, 1 round expended tactically. When prospectors returned in the spring of 1879, the story had spread. Men were seen not just hanging ropes, but building Vane redoubts, or badger walls. The trading post in Bozeman reported a new demand for heavy pry bars and picks, alongside the usual rifles and ammunition. Elias Thorne himself, his arm set badly, retreated from the mountains, But he told every man he met, "Don't trust the rope. The rope lies. Trust the rock." That sod-brained engineer was right. In the following decade, as the U.S. Army began to administer the new national park, Vane's principles were slowly, perhaps unknowingly, adopted. Official recommendations for survey teams and ranger stations began to include siting camps on defensible ground and using local stone or earthworks as primary deterrents. The rifle, the heavy, smoking icon of the frontier, was finally understood to be a tool of last resort, a loud, expensive, and often failed reaction. Silas Vane, the quiet engineer, had proven that survival in this new, extreme world was not about the force you could project. It was about the energy you could manage, the psychology you could predict, and the physics you could respect. He had proven that in the battle between man and nature, the most powerful weapon was not brute force, but an intelligent, angled design.